So the one of the perfections, paramitas, is the perfection paramita of well, it's translated as perseverance, but it's really joyful perseverance, enthusiastic perseverance, which is it's the fourth one of the six paramitas of the Mahayana Bodhisattva's path. And the beauty of it, in a sense, is that for our practice, for example, for our sitting, in general, we might have perseverance with what we do in life, with where we, I want to persevere to get this, to bring something back, or persevere at work, or persevere to finish something. The paramita, the beyond, in a sense, is developing inner quality. And when we, so for example, when we go to sit in our cushion to meditate, when we go for meditation, if we go there with this type of enthusiastic perseverance, this joyful, because of what it does, in a sense, of awakening our mind, then of course we're entering with somewhat the right attitude. Of course, I've talked before, in the Mahayana, we generally have the attitude, looking to benefit ourselves, to benefit all living beings, to go beyond suffering. That's that's something that we try to generate at the beginning. So when we do a practice, we want to have that type of joyfulness to go and to sit down. And of course, it's an interesting kind of a dichotomy, in the sense that it almost feeds off of itself, because the practice itself, just of meditating, of sitting, which is extremely necessary on the path, because we need to realize the nature of our mind, realize the nature of our consciousness. What is our consciousness? What is our mind? We don't learn this at all. We don't think about it very often. So, when we go and we get water, for example, in general, the real nature of water is purity. Because that water is pure, we can take that, we can drink it, we can put it within our bodies to nourish ourselves. Sometimes, that water is mixed with something. It's diluted. And it's got something impure inside of it. But because its nature is purity, that can be removed. We can remove the impurities and have that pure water, because that's its real nature. If its real nature was impure, it could not be purified. The nature of our mind is pure awareness, pure knowing. When our mind doesn't know correctly, that's when it's diluted. That's when it's mixed with the different types of emotions, afflicting motions that are afflicting it. The beauty of it is that the nature of the mind and these emotions are not one. Like a mirror. When we have a mirror can reflect. It can reflect our face. It can reflect whatever comes in front of it. That's the knowing of our mind. It can reflect. It reflects all objects. It reflects, I should say, all things, whether they're internal thoughts or external, what seems to be external phenomena. The mirror, when it's got dirt on it, distorts, reflects a distorted view. But we remove that dirt, we clean the dirt off, we wipe the dirt from the mirror, and then it reflects. It reflects our image clearly. Because the dirt and the mirror are not one, it can be removed. Because the delusions of anger, hatred, jealousy, pride, the distorted neurotic behavior of our mind are not one with its true nature, they can be removed. That's Buddhahood. That's enlightenment. That's awakening. That's opening up. When we sit with our meditation, is used to, at first at least, calm our mind down. What's quite interesting, actually, because the next paramita, which is actually meditation or samadhi, concentration, which is we begin to develop, the kind of calm abiding, which is the nature of our mind. Just like the ocean in the storms, when the hurricanes hit and the winds are pushing it, that water is all shaky and we look inside and we can't see the bottom. But when it calms down, we see the bottom. Or when we dive into the depth of the ocean, no matter how bad the storm is on top, the nature is calm and clear. The nature of our mind is calm and clear. As long as we do not recognize its nature, there's always this continuous struggle that goes on. So in the meditation, in the calm abiding, within the meditation, we go in there and we soften ourselves, calmly abide within the nature of our mind, its real nature, which allows us to develop insight. The insight is basically opening up what's already there, but has been covered up within ourselves. So the beauty is that this is not a dogmatic approach, that Buddha sat down and said, here, you have to do these and it's for this. In fact, it's reality. It's our reality. And when we sit and the mind becomes clearer and becomes calmer, the viewer begins to view clearly. When the view is not clear, it's projecting. What is projection? When we when we have somebody that we know, excuse me. When we have somebody we know that we don't have fondness for, that we work with, that we run into, we build up a concept of who this person is. And we reinforce that concept. So every time we come in contact, we see our projection, our concept of that person. Even if that person has went through an incredible transformation, he still appears to us to be something different, something we're projecting, not anything to do with his relative reality. Forget his absolute nature of mind, his absolute reality, even his relative nature. So as we project on to this particular person, that's where our emotions arise themselves from. Dislike, hatred, And of course the opposite, which is when we project onto somebody, our own view of being beautiful, attachment for somebody we want to pull closer to ourselves. We stay stuck in that particular view of that particular person. The reality is there is no absolute beauty existing on its own outside. Inside, it's not independent of many different factors. But we project onto it, oh, that's something I really like, that's something I need to go after and I have attachment for, and I want to pull into myself. We've talked about this before, this pull and pushing energy that goes on, which is exhausting us. Literally exhausting us. Of course we're exhausted because there's a continuous battle going on, except for the times we begin to calm it down. We let the water kind of settle. We let the clarity of the mind begin to arise itself. So within our meditation, we begin to feel the nature of our mind, the actual openness, the actual spaciousness that's always there. But when we find ourselves being magnetized within the situations that, because this is who I am, a wrong view, an absolute view of who I am that I basically depend on all the time. It's a reference point. Because this is me, then this is that. And because of that, there's this crazy energy of grasping, of pushing, of this and that. So even while we're sitting inside of our meditation, whatever arises, whatever feelings, whatever thoughts arise, depending on how we begin to relax and feel actually the spaciousness. We don't feel that in this situation, especially it becomes so high tense energy sometimes that there is no space. We feel suffocated. We're never really being suffocated. That's our wrong view. Based on a wrong view about ourselves. How does this arise? How does this happen, from the nature of the mind? Because our mind, the intellectual mind, every moment is beginning to grasp at something, push at something, until we begin to open up, feel the openness, feel the beauty within, feel the space within, and begin to interact, with the world around us in a completely different way. This is the path. This is being on the path. At the beginning, it's more difficult. So at the beginning, we need to accumulate, positive energy, which is what our practices are like. As we talked about the paramitas, first paramita of giving becomes an open giving, which whatever it takes, to somebody's hungry, you're giving them food, or somebody needs a smile, whatever it might be, we begin to do these things, and this begins to align our mind with its true nature. While we're aligning our mind with its true nature, we are on the path. So we have giving, We have natural, the second one, which is discipline or morality, which is how our actions are, which are, when it comes out of the true nature of our mind, it's a paramita, because we naturally know not to be, doing things wrong. Sure, at the beginning stages, that's where people do things where they'll take, like, certain vows or become monks or whatever it might be. It's in order to keep us in this atmosphere. So the vows kind of work as like a fence, in a sense. Kind of like where we, a lot of times when we live, we have a home, so we have a fence around it, to protect us. So because, we're, where we're at on the path, we're not exactly ready, we need some kind of protection. So the protection says, oh, don't do this, don't kill, don't steal, don't lie. It made me just think for a second. So once we get to the paramita of enthusiastic perseverance and think a little bit like with meditation, I remember within the kind of negative karma, there's one which is idle talk or gossip. And I remember the teachers telling an interesting story that when it comes to sitting around at night, we have so much energy to sit and talk about other people, talk about trivia. But when it comes to practices, we don't have that much energy, that much patience. We get tired. So this, understanding of the value of what some of these, what these practices mean and how they lead us to the, to our real, to our real home, to our true nature, to the, the nature of our mind, is so important. So as we accumulate these positive energies, along the path, which is a collection of merit, and as we purify, some of these, wrong views, these, negativities within us, the path begins to open up more, and we begin to have certain types of experiences. We have experiences of calmness, which is the nature of our mind. These are just experiences. We're not becoming Buddha. We begin to sit and we begin to feel openness, spaciousness. We get to the state of what it feels like, and I hate to use this, but of completely letting go, because letting go is an activity of itself. When it's actually, what we're doing is becoming, what you could say is absent of activity. So we don't have activity toward these different things that we dislike or like. It's so open, it's so spacious. We get a glimpse of that. All of a sudden, the energy that we begin to feel, within, not just, within our mind, but within our whole body. As you know, in Buddhism, we have our body, we have our energy and our speech, and we have our mind. And we begin to see the interrelationships between our energy and our body and our mind. Times when we feel, oh, I have no energy, I can't do something. That I is a false concept. It's a distorted view of the clarity of the clear nature of mind, of the luminous activity of the mind. It's distorted. So it's possible to go beyond that within that moment, within the next moment. This is the energy that we begin to experience for the path. But then again, we have to become very careful, because we have that type of clarity, openness that takes place. But then we begin, and we want to know how this happens, we begin to think again. We begin to grasp. We try to grab it back again. We have to let go then. That's the time we need to, again, just leave it. Not let all this activity, all this thought and thinking, grasping at, I need to have this experience again. Because all that builds up again is the neurotic energy. That's the play of our life. We experience something, we experience it correctly, we grasp back at it. That grasping cannot find it. The only thing that finds it is non-activity. How to be active, how to be non-active within activity. How to not meditate within meditation. That's what the key is. That's why we sit down and we begin to understand more about ourselves, about our energy, about our life, our feelings, and whether they're real or whether they're distortions or not. This is what develops, which is actually the sixth paramita, which is the insight into emptiness. Emptiness is not nothingness. It's not nothing exists. Things exist, but they exist relatively, conventionally. How they exist absolutely is that their nature is empty. So at the same time, simultaneously, everything that we come in contact with exists in its conventional way and its absolute way. The distorted mind that sees it as an absolute, that's the absolute beauty, or that's the absolute terrible, is what is called ignorance. Ignoring reality. Knowing wrongly. Marikpa. Knowing incorrectly. That's where the problem comes in. And when we know, that's knowing other, when we know ourself wrongly, that this is the me. And because this is me, this is what I feel. Every moment, my awareness doesn't know itself as pure awareness. It knows itself as some self-entity. But if one was to look for where that me is, where that I exists, it cannot be found, because it's only a dependent, deluded thought. It's a deluded concept of oneself. There's a pure view of oneself, and there's this distorted view of oneself. The distorted view of oneself is the home base. This is where we view everything from. And the more we view ourselves from that, and the more we view everything we come in contact from this distorted view, it imprints on our pure view. It distorts it. This is creating karmic formation. This is creating habit. So when we come in contact with certain situations, we can't control it. Just automatically hits us. It's beyond intellect at that time. It just hits us. And we hate something, or I don't like that person. Or I love this person, and I have to have that, whether it means, stepping on somebody else. If I have to become president, it doesn't matter who I have to push aside to become president, to step in the bank. President of the United States, president of a company. That particular view has to be met with the power of, with insight and meditation to be able to cut through. It has to cut through the ignorance. It has to see the reality of non-duality rather than every moment we experience everything as duality. Here I am, and that is that. And that is that, and that is that. This is me, that is that. Every moment. Beginning to experience, the openness, the spaciousness. The nature of the mind is like space. It can't be grasped, it can't be found, it's open. That's the real nature. But we see it incorrectly and we become suffocated. The nature of the mind is like the ocean we talked about, that calm in the bottom of the ocean. That's its real nature. When our energy stirs, those are the winds that stir up our emotions. And then we're in control of whatever kind of energy goes on around us. And we project onto that. And so it feeds itself, and it keeps on reestablishing this world. That world, in Buddhist terminology, in Sanskrit, is what's called samsara. Confused state of being. The chains of samsara are those karmic formations that keep us locked in, so we're not free. We might say, here, I live in America, I'm free, I'm a free person. You can't tell me what to do or this or that. I'm free. When we really look, we're not free. We might live in a place that's relatively freer than some other place, but we're not free. Freedom is when we gain control over these emotions, these wrong views. And that's what the path is. We begin to see things from a different standpoint. So we have natural patience, natural love and compassion, which begins to be an absolute expression of our real nature. Because the real nature doesn't see an I in that. And so it doesn't have the hatred. And so it has such total openness, like that space, that on a relative basis, it's like saying, okay, well, I have two arms, but this arm doesn't matter. Well, this arm matters. It's part of me. The reality is that everything is part of us. It's all dependent. We're all dependent. There's nothing independent, but we think we're independent. So our actions follow that. And if I can create this for myself, then I will be happy. I'll be fine with everything. The truth is, even if we were to have the ability for a short period of time to create what we would consider a perfect environment for ourselves, we would still not completely be happy, because at some point, our mind is going to realize, at the very least, we have a mother, father, or had a mother, father, have a brothers, sisters, had brothers, sisters, have children, have some other friends, and we begin to feel, sensitivity for them. And so that's where that enlightened attitude, that awakened attitude comes in and says, we need to help. We need to help others. And we have this enthusiastic energy to go on and help them and see them, not walk through life completely insensitive to what is moving, what is going on around us. So all of this comes about through understanding the basis that the nature of our mind is awakened, enlightened, not asleep. So in the meditation, there's a couple things that is always spoken about as being somewhat of a hindrance to our meditation. One of them is agitation. So that's where we want to get the quiet mind, calm, clear mind. We sit and we let our mind settle. We follow our breath, or we do some other kind of concentration on an object of a Buddha, a deity, whatever it might be. And then the other one is mental dullness, which is a relative of ignorance. It's related to ignorance, which is a dullness where we begin to fall asleep. If we're sitting in meditation, just because our body is sitting here doesn't mean that we're awake. So when we begin to recognize this kind of, dullness, almost like driving through something, like driving through a fog, where you can't see. So you bring your awareness back again. Why? Because that's the nature of our mind, is awareness. It's clear awareness. Awareness is always there. It's aware of what we're feeling, what we're thinking, what we hear. It's interesting as we sit here, when we just are ordinarily sitting in the room and we're talking, some of the different sounds we don't hardly hear. Sounds that might be outside, there might be people, or different things, we don't hear them. But when you begin to get into more quiet state, subtle state of your mind, then you hear everything. But how does your mind relate to that? If our minds are fighting with those things, if our mind is fighting with our body, if our mind is fighting with that being tired, then it's not waking. So, of course, that doesn't mean you can just push out of that. So in meditation, if you're falling asleep, sometimes, you can, if you're meditating with your eyes just slightly open, you can look up a little bit more, raise your eyes in order, to wake you up. Sometimes it's necessary to get up and take a walk, to move around. That's becoming aware of ourselves. It was like in the instructions that Guru Rinpoche, Padmasambhava, gave, that at some points we need to be aware of ourselves. So sometimes we need to do breathing exercises, Tsalung, work with our energy channels. Sometimes we might need to work with our body with certain type of exercise or yoga and things. Be aware, and there's always a key existing every moment, because we're not frozen in that moment. We think we're frozen in that moment. Just like when there's a big storm outside there, we think, oh, this is terrible and it's never going to leave. But that storm is going to go and the sky is going to clear because the nature of the sky and the space is clear. Just like that, moment by moment, our awareness is like a stream. We will begin to awaken by working on it. If we ignore it, then it's like putting the dirt underneath. We have dirt inside the room, we take the dirt and we sweep it, but we put it under the carpet. We didn't get rid of it, it's still there. So this is the path. I think we'll end here, if maybe time for a couple questions if you have. Anything?
Yeah, what I kind of derived was that we whatever activity comes from dawn to dusk in our life every day, we knowingly or unknowingly try to deal with it, fight it, spend the energy. But the best thing to do is just create emptiness by letting go 80% of it then, or 90, whatever these 80-20 rules are.
Yeah.
You will find some peace and tranquility in your life, in a day-to-day life.
Yeah, you don't have to worry about creating emptiness. Emptiness is always there. It's always, so that's the reason why you can begin to recognize, the kind of empty nature, the empty concept of that.
Okay.
Yeah. So, again, you could yourself think about situations that at a certain point in your life were so bothersome to you. And then later you began to have a different view of them. That's the intelligence part of your mind beginning to deal with something and it doesn't bother you. If that particular situation was absolutely existing the way you viewed it when you were being bothered by it, it could never change. But because its nature is empty of that concept, you can recognize it. Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah, so if somebody's, maybe this is a strange question, but for most of us, like, if you have a relatively calm day or relatively calm situation in your life, then you can take some space out and you can kind of go with the flow more. And
Yeah.
But other times, other people, a lot of people are just working their tails off to survive or whatever it is, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then the contact with other people it seems like that happens a lot. People are just bouncing off each other rather than sharing anything. It can happen a lot like that. So
Yeah.
I was thinking, like, someone who's maybe fully enlightened, maybe you just want to comment on that, but their vow is to help all beings, so they're taking on all that craziness from moment to moment of other people, but it doesn't throw them.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's nothing there to throw them, basically. Yeah, because first thing is they can see the situation clearly. So if somebody, it's like I remember reading a thing or listening to His Holiness the Dalai Lama talk one time. He was talking about a scorpion, and he said he doesn't get angry at the scorpion because the nature of that scorpion is to bite. Yeah. So when enlightened energy, enlightened mind can see something, he can understand what's being done, and so and he can have compassion that's being not pushed by the pure part of that particular sentient being, but by the ignorance and by the anger and hatred within that, and have the compassion toward that. Now, generally saying, speaking about why people become monks and things sometimes is because, which is probably, my story, I needed to isolate myself away from certain energies in order to try to move on. And so that's where you take those vows and you build fences around yourself, and so you're in a different area because you're not ready for it. But at a certain point, you go back and you can go into those areas and deal with it differently. So it's kind of knowing where you're at. So if you're walking down the street and there's some really bad stuff going on, it might be better to avoid that, move away from it. Now, if you're Bruce Lee, you can maybe walk in there and straighten the whole thing out. Or
Right.
yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Until next time.
Yes, yeah. I mean,